Good morning and welcome back to the IGNO class of MEG4. I call it a class because interactions are not there. Normally, it's a counseling session where you're supposed to ask questions and I'm supposed to satisfy you of your queries. In any case, I would like you to have your blocks in front of you. Please keep on asking questions and I'll try and see if I can answer those in a given time or later on. Today we are looking at block 6, where we'll be discussing sociolinguistics. Sociolinguistics. Now, what is sociolinguistics? Now, we all use language every day, but what is the relevance of languages in our lives? Do you think? Now, if you remember, in block 1, we discussed the language is unique to human beings. For animals, we call it communication. We don't call it a language. And if it is unique to human beings, we are also creative where animals are not. We can use new words, new phrases, or sentences which the animals are unable to. They will not be able to recognize a new word, a new sound rather. For us, because of the advent of internet or the computer, or because of the coming of the science and technology of age, and we get almost every other day we get new words, we get new abbreviations, we get new acronyms, and we, as language changes, as language is living and it changes, so we have got different ways of looking at language, we have got different ways of expressing, we have got different ways of communication. Now it's a mysterious kind of thing if we really look at it very deeply. Now, language is used within a society. We need at least two people. We need to speak to someone, we need to write or whatever. We need to communicate with someone, and the other person, the receiver, will send his communications back. So it's a two-way communication. Now, it's unless I am able to connect with the other person, if the other person doesn't understand the medium I have used, or the code I have used, or the message I have used, there's no communication. To a person who is visually impaired, I cannot show a picture. A person who has a hearing impairment will not be able to hear anything, even if I use a um, public address system. So the medium is very important, and what code I'm using. If someone were to talk to me in Russian, I may not know Russian. I may not know Chinese. The code is different. If you speak to me in English, if you speak to me in my mother tongue or some North Indian Hindi, possibly I will be able to understand. And the message. What's the message? If it is a scientific message, Many of us who do not belong to the discipline of science may not be able to understand it. If a literary message, person who is not very much interested in literature may not be able to understand. So all these three things we have to understand when we look at communication. So we need another person, and definitely we use language in a society where we live. We communicate with each other. So what is society? It comprises of a group of individuals who are normally drawn together for a certain purpose or purposes. Now, whatever be the purpose, language is an integral part of the human beings. The inability to use language appropriately or adequately can affect one's status in the society or may alter one's personality. Language cannot exist and develop outside the society. So, if we have comparison made, what is lyrics to music is language to society. So, it's an integral part of the society. Now, sociolinguistics studies this complex relationship between language and society. Now, some questions asked by the sociolinguistics, or two things they would like to investigate. First, they would like to discuss, is language static or variable? Now, this we have already said earlier. Language is not static. It's dynamic. It's living. So it changes. So if you look at English itself, around 450 to 1100 AD, we had the Old English, which we cannot either read or we cannot speak. We cannot use Old English unless one makes it a study of his own. Then around 11 to 1500 AD, we have got the modern English, the Middle English. 1500 to 1800, we have got early modern English, and 1800 onwards, we have got this late modern English, which we are using these days. And even this is changing continually. So language is not static. So this sociolinguists have found out. To what extent are social factors responsible for language variation? This is another question they ask. Lots of factors are involved. We'll discuss later on. How is it that people are able to communicate despite variation? See, there are a lot of variations, a lot of different dialects. Even within dialects, there are a lot of variations. And in spite of variation, we are able to communicate with each other. How is it possible? How do we do it? Are standard languages different from the dialects? Why should each social context be examined in its own right? Are there any homogeneous societies in reality? Can language be used as a tool for power in all spheres of social life, like education, religion, and administration, and lead to social exploitation? Can language initiate a social change? Why do languages change? Is language planning essential? We'll try and answer these questions by and by. Now, sociolinguists, since the 60s, 1960s, they have been able to expand the realm considerably, and sociolinguistics became an independent field of academic research. And this is mainly because of the growing dissatisfaction with structural linguistics, which discussed Ferdinand de Saussure, we have discussed Bloomfield, and also Chomsky's perspectives on language. So there was a lot of dissatisfaction. So people went on examining things, they went on identifying things. Now, linguists have been engaged in characterizing the abstract knowledge or the competence that native speakers of language possess to the total exclusion of the social context in which language is learned and used. That is the problem. We cannot take it out of the social context. Apart from considering language as a system of grammar, sociolinguists find it equally important to study its usage and functions in various situations. That is important. We use language in different situations, in different ways. That needs to be studied. So meaning may change in different contexts. Suppose I use a sentence like, can you close the door? Can you close the door? In matters of structure or the form, it's an interrogative sentence. But then what's the meaning? When I say, can you close the door? I'm possibly requesting someone or ordering someone to close the door. And a request or a command is an imperative sentence. Now, earlier, what we know is in our prescriptive grammar, in traditional grammar, imperative sentences were known as headless sentences. The subject was not there, so is to only have the action verbs go, come, sit, and all that, and that is imperative. So, in this case, things have changed. There's a variation. In the real context, we want to be a little formal. We want to be seem little less rude. So instead of saying close the door, please close the door, say, can you close the door? Now, social linguistics is a meeting ground for linguists and social scientists. Now, there is a study of language as well as study of society. So it's a meeting ground between these two. Sociolinguists examine the variable nature of the language. As I said earlier, they believe language is not static, but it's dynamic. So there are changes. Just as a piece of currency keeps on evolving and changing So does languages. Language variation can be investigated at any level: phonological, morphological, syntactic, semantic, or discourse. Variation may be due to a number of factors, like geographical factors, because of gender, because of age, because of education, because of social class, caste, and maybe many more. Or maybe because of style, whether a formal style or a informal style. Register differences. Register, what is register? So for law, we use a kind of a language which we will not use in the field of medicine, which we will not use in the field of literature. So that is a register of law or legal register. For medicine, it may be another register, a medical register, or a literary register. These are all different registers. But we still understand all that quite a bit. Language can also vary according to situation or the social context. In what context we are saying, in what situation we are speaking. So language may vary. At times we do not speak in full sentences. We understand the meaning of sentence because of a reference earlier. So that reference may not be explicitly stated. So sociolinguists try to examine and explain linguistic variation in terms of personal, geographical, or social relations. The social context is considered to be the utmost importance in social linguistics. Now, if you look at India, there are at least 1,652 languages that are spoken in India. So there's a great deal of diversity. But in America, it's more, more of a homogeneous society, whereas ours is more of heterogeneous. Yet, despite this diverse and linguistic variation, there seems to be some kind of underlying unity which enables communication to take place quite easily. And it is not unusual for an individual in India to maintain multiple identities. For example, a Gujarati speaker in Delhi may be speaking Gujarati at home with his family members, English in his office, Hindi with other friends, and yet another language in another context. What is important is to remember that each social context should be examined in its own right. Now, another concern for sociolinguists has been to regard language as a marker of group solidarity or group identity. An individual creates his or her identity in terms of the social group or groups he or she belongs to. He or she shares certain social linguistic norms with other members of the social group. Now, there are two forces operating one leading to similarities between individuals, and by conforming to social group or groups and their norms, and the other leading to individual differences. These forces are often referred to as conformity and individualism. Language is also used as a tool of power in all spheres of social life, be it education, religion, media, administration, and so on. The, which is the standard variety? Normally, the language used by the rich or the higher classes or the powerful ones often is made a standard variety, and other varieties are neglected. But no variety is linguistically inferior. Because someone was in power, because someone was rich, because of that factor, their variety, the variety used by them, becomes the standard. Problem of variation. Suppose people in Delhi speak Hindi, people in Eastern UP also speak Hindi, people in America or England or Australia speak English. Now, that Hindi spoken by people of Delhi isn't the same as the Hindi spoken by people in Eastern UP. The English used in America or in Britain or in Australia also differ significantly. Now, suppose in America they pronounce schedule as schedule. They spell the word color COLOR. Or they use sentences like, I am taking leave from Monday through Saturday. In Britain, it would have been, I'm taking leave from Monday to Saturday. And if people from Australia may speak like this, have you come to die? When they mean, have you come today? How many miles and how many females? If you if you used to watch uh, cricket commentary earlier, and if there's an Australian commentator, you might have heard 188 for 8. Excuse me. Even apart from this, there are different types of variations in our everyday use. There are again internal variations. English used in Britain may again vary from whether it's south of England or in north of England or east of England or Wales or Kent. The same English can vary. Now, all of these are again dialects. Suppose the sound error in New York is a car. In Britain, they might say car. Uh, in Britain, they might say ask. In in America, they might say ask. So there are a lot of variations, and these can be considered as separate dialects. Let's look at ethnography of communication. Delheims initiated the study of ethnography of communication in the 60s. He was concerned with both linguists and anthropologists. That they're missing a large and important area of communication by not considering speech as an activity in its own right. Anthropologists were concerned primarily with conducting ethnographic studies, different aspects of communication, such as kinship studies, but were completely ignoring language. Linguists, on the other hand, were concerned only with language as an abstract system and were not addressing issues of how somebody used one of those substances in actual situations. By focusing exclusively on competence in a language, or communicative competence was being ignored. Ethnography of speaking or communication examines the role of language in the communicative conduct of communities. The ethnography of communication was therefore proposed to fill the gap between what is usually described in ethnographies in grammars, although both the anthropologists and the linguists were speech as evidence of other patterns, neither brings into focus. The ethnography of communication is actually a question of what a child internalizes about speaking beyond rules of grammar and a dictionary while becoming a full-fledged member of the speech community. A speech community. Broomfield introduced a term called speech community. There's English speech community, or a Bengali speech community, or Assamese speech community, or a Oriya speech community. They understand the variations, they understand the language of each other in one community. Uh, the terms of speech community refers to a group of individuals who share certain linguistic features and who might be said to speak the same language or dialect or variety. While theoretical linguists like to use the term to denote a completely homogeneous group in which all members speak the same language with perhaps the same degree of competence and fluency. with hardly any individual differences. For sociolinguists, the term denotes a real group of people living a real world. Such a real group would obviously consist of individuals who are different from one another in several respects, such as age, sex, education, social class, etc. All this impinge on language, and hence these individuals would differ from one another in the matter of language also. So there cannot be any homogeneous speech community. So even inside a dialect or a speech community, we can have variations. There are even idiolects. There are dialects, there are as well as the idiolects. The personal differences. According to Charles Hockett, each language defines a speech community, a whole set of people who communicate with each other either directly or indirectly via their common language. So here what we get is two things: the common language and communication. A further dimension is added by another definition, according to which speech community is any human aggregate characterized by regular and frequent interaction by means of shared body of verbal signs and set off from similar aggregates by significant differences in language use. So we get three things here: a common language, frequent interaction and communication, and distinguishable from other communities. Yeah. Yes. I was just checking whether people are there and watching the program or not. Then again, suppose if when we're looking at this English speech community, or the British, American, or the Australian, in the British, suppose with the Yorkshire, London, and Scotland dialects. Again, in London, we've got the middle class, or the upper class, and the lower class. There are again differences here. So similarly, in our languages, we've got this uh, same same differences. Again, there are dialects. Again, there is a diglossic situation. The upper classes speak in one kind of way, and the so-called lower classes speak in a different kind of way. We use language in a very formal situation, and we use language in a very informal situation, which is rather inferior, in an informal tone or the informal style. Then there is a problem of multilingualism. In a place like India, we speak more than one language. In society, we hear so many other languages. So we communicate with each other in all different languages. Now, is there in reality a one language community? It's very difficult. Uh, so Canada. In Canada, most people learn and use and function with French and English. So we use our own mother tongue at one level, we use Hindi at another level, we use English at another level. Most of us have three languages. Some even speak Urdu, and maybe we speak much more languages. Again, even in our own language, we speak the standard variety as well as we speak in our own uh, dialects. Now, let's look at bilingualism. India has a long tradition of grassroots bilingualism. As an Indian, perhaps all of us take this fact for granted. Now, let's look at some of the definitions of bilingualism. Bilingualism refers to the proficiency in the use of more than one language. Till some time back, it was believed that monolingualism or the use of one language was the norm in most parts, especially in developed countries. And bilingualism was some kind of aberrant or unusual phenomena. In recent times, however, it has been gradually realized that all of us are essentially bilinguals. Because even where one is supposed to be suppose using only one language, one does control and employ several styles, registers, and dialects of the same language. Strictly speaking, however, the term bilingualism is referred to situations where two or more distinct languages are involved. Let us look at some definitions by certain linguists. According to Bloomfield, bilingualism refers to a native like control of two languages. Native like control. According to Uriel Weinrich, bilingualism is the practice of using two languages simultaneously. According to Arsenian, bilingualism means the simultaneous learning of two languages. According to Diebold, bilingualism is the ability to use two language in the environment of the native language. Now see, there are a lot of differences in these definitions. Well, Arsenian says the learning of two languages, simultaneous learning of two languages. Bloomfield says a native like proficiency. Weinreich says use of two languages. Diebold adds another dimension, the ability of to use two languages in the environment of the native language or the ill one. As pointed out in the introduction, one of the important dimensions of any discussion of bilingualism is the process of learning a second language. In order to understand the process of learning, one has to find answers like when and in what circumstances does the learning of the second language take place? What are the motivations for learning the second language? How is learning of the second language encouraged and supported by society of which the learner is a member? Second language we also refer to by L2. This is the symbol used. Now, the first question was when and in what circumstance would the answer to this would be obviously relate to the age of the second language learner. When do you start using a second language? Under what circumstances does it take place? Was it informal or formal? Whether you learn it at school or learn it outside. Some learn English both informally and formally, while others get to learn it only formally in the classroom. This has obvious implications for the amount of exposure one has in L2 or the second language, as well as for the degree of proficiency one attains in it. Those who learn L2 at an early age and continue to grow up in circumstances that provide adequate exposure and reinforcement to L2 naturally attain greater proficiency. As I say, it's easier to learn a second language at a lower age. At a higher age, it becomes a little difficult. So people can become more proficient if they learn it earlier. Now, what are the motivations for learning L2? Why do we learn L2? Maybe in some cases we need to get a job. In some cases we need to rise up in the society. We need to show a status. Maybe we can get a job. Or maybe we just want to learn that language. And the last question here was, how is the learning of language to encourage and supported by society of which the learner is a member? Uh, People would accept a person learning English rather than Sanskrit. The society has its views. They know if you know English, you can be of a standard, you can come up in the society, can be in a higher strata. But Sanskrit may not help that way. Now, being a bilingual, according to UNESCO 1978, bilingualism is not an absolute state, not an all or none phenomena, but a relative state. It may range from a smattering of second language through a minimal but sufficiently functional competence in the operational control of second language to what Bloomfield calls a native like competence. So, bilingual can be incipient bilingual, may just know a few words, maybe a beginner, maybe a subordinate is not equal to the other language, or inadequate, or it can be adequate, it can be equal, it can be coordinate. Now, what are the functioning as bilingual? There are a few things we need to understand. The purposes. What is the purpose of learning a second language? Let us look at few examples. Maybe for interacting informally and casually with speakers of second language, for interacting with speakers of second language in more formal settings, for the purpose of academic advancement, maybe reading books, consulting journals, listening to lectures and talks, etc. Sorry. For getting access to both print and electronic media, for professionals, administrative purposes, for instance, for successfully functioning as a lawyer, a doctor, an engineer, a salesman, a government officer, or an ambassador, for interacting with a peer group in casual, informal, or intimate encounters, as well as in more formal contexts. There's some of the reasons why a person learns a second language. The domains. What are the domains? We divide human activity into several domains, and all these domains, when put together, account for most of the things that an average human being does or is expected to do. For the purpose of our discussions, we should operate with the following domains: family, we use language in a family; in the neighborhood; in the school; for trade and commerce; in government and administration; in workplace; in religion. In all these domains, we use language. Consequences of bilingualism. Now, what are the consequences of bilingualism for the individual or for the social group or both the language is concerned? All these need to be discussed. We learn two languages, and at times we use them in a diagnostic relationship. One is high, other is low. One is in the hierarchical order. One is used in a formal setup. The other is used in ordinary day-to-day activities. This is a consequence for the bilingual group. L1 and L2 language, first language and second language, at times are coexistent. L1 and L2, due to mutual influence, may undergo structural changes at the level of sound, syntax, vocabulary, and semantics. The influence of first language may be there on the second language. The influence of second language may be there on the first languages. Standardization. Here we look at the need for standardization, the process of standardization, the consequences of standardization, socio-ethical critique of standardization. seen lot of varieties, lot of dialects. Now, when you say English is the national language of England, now it is not all the dialects. One particular dialect, one particular dialect is important. So the dialect, the languages, the sentences used, the words used, or the pronunciations made, all these conform to one standard. English language, despite regional, social, historical variation, somehow has one standard from which is used, a form which is used in book, news bulletin, school, and the countries referred to um, earlier, like we talked of Australia, America, and Africa, and all that. Now, in spite of this, we talk of a standard. As we have seen earlier, standard variety is something which has a background of which a community which has a background of power. They were in the power, maybe they were rich, and they somehow forced this standard. So their standard was accepted, their variety was accepted. Now, if you go to the rural areas, language maybe is more pure. But if you're in the urban areas, language is all mixed up and all varieties, not so stable as the language of the rural areas. But as people in the urban areas are more in power, you get more of literatures from there. We get more a lot of university professors from there. So most of the people of the higher strata come from the urban areas. So that variety used by them is considered to be standard. Now, the need for standardization. Now, unless we have a standard, it may be difficult for us to communicate officially. For official purposes, we need some language. We need one dialect or standard form because that doesn't change much. So we can fix the norms. So it becomes easier for people to communicate. So let's, in short, say why we need a standardization, why we need a standard variety. It's for creation of scientific descriptions of a language, creation of textbooks, primers, reference materials, creation of discourse in various disciplines, dissemination of knowledge, education and literary, a sense of unity and identity, proper smooth functioning of law and order, easy governance, interregional and international communication, modernity, stability, and development. These are the areas where we need standardization, why we need standardization. Now, the process of standardization. Standardization refers to the process by which a language gets codified in some way. Quite often, certain events or items may also be associated with this process. In the case of standardization of language, it is customary to mention such things as Wycliffe's translation of the Bible into English, Caxton's establishment of printing press in England, Dr. Johnson's Dictionary of English, published in 1755. Apart from such events or items, linguists and sociolinguistics generally agree that coming into being of standard language is the process of standardization involves four stages. We have also seen the English Pronouncing Dictionary by Daniel Jones. It set the standards for the RP or the received pronunciation. Now, here we talk of four stages in the process of standardization. First, we have selection. First of all, we have to select a variety from amongst all the several varieties for making it a standard. Now, which variety we are going to select, or which variety gets selected, is a variety of the people in power. So it has got a connection with power. The power may be economic, political, cultural, or combination of two or more of these. It's perhaps reasonable to expect that in any society the elite, political, economic, or cultural, would see to it that the variety of language they use is chosen for standardization. Codification. Once we have selected the variety which we are going to use, we need to codify that. The norms have to be fixed. The pronunciation, spellings, and the other writing conventions have to be fixed. America, they have a different kind of a spelling system. Pronunciation is different than that is in Britain. Australia has a different set of pronunciation systems. The stage of the process of standardization involves the writing of standard grammars. These grammars do not refer to the grammars of the other varieties. Now we are talking of the grammar of the standard variety. Manuals of pronunciation. We've talked of the English Pronouncing Dictionary by Daniel Jones. Thesauruses, reference books, dictionaries. We have the Oxford English Dictionary. We have all other dictionaries. Codification and fixing of norms of usage imply that forms enshrined in grammars and other reference books can be seen as the only correct, pure, and elegant or sophisticated forms. This codified frozen set of linguistic norms used for norm thus comes to be accepted as the correct standard and becomes reference point used for treating all other varieties as variation forms, deviations, from the norm as substandard and non-standard. Elaboration of function. Now, where are we going to use this standard variety? Whether we use it in the playfield or the family or the neighborhood? No. This is used more in the formal public domains. The most powerful and pervasive use of standard language is in education. Textbooks, learning materials, lectures, seminars, examinations, all these require use of standard language. Higher education, technical education, and scientific education especially call for use of standard language. Government agencies, law and judiciary, bureaucracy, diplomacy, trade and commerce. All this again call for the use of standard dialect or standard language. As standard language comes to be used in more and more domains, it needs to be expanded in terms of spatial, technical vocabularies, which often requires the creation of new words and new terminologies. Then we talk of acceptance. Let me just check if the Facebook online is. Yeah, some people are watching, it seems. Good. Acceptance. The variety gets codified and standardized, has to gain wide acceptance within the community. Now, this has to be accepted. Unless this is accepted as a standard, the confusion remains. The speakers, though belonging to diverse dialect groups, must come to recognize, accept, and cherish it as their language. Sometimes it may also happen that standardized language is also recognized as the national or the official language, thus giving its users a distinct national linguistic identity. English in its standardized forms is the national, official, and dominant language in England, the USA, Australia. Hindi is the national official language of India. While languages like Bangla, Gujarati, Marathi, Kannada, Manipuri are recognized, used, and accepted as official languages in the respective states. Consequences of standard dialect or standard language. Standardization brings in being the standard language. Once a standard language has come into being, it serves several other purposes for the community, the social group, region, or nation state. It serves as a symbol of distinct, separate identity as a token of independence. Australians and Americans are proud of their nationhood and their distinct identity as a mark of national pride. They proclaim their standard English as Australian or American. Another positive outcome of standardization is that of the community or nation state gets a formalized, uniform linguistic entity that is a standard language that can open channels of communication between linguistically diverse groups and communities. This is important for people and messages to travel across space, overcoming dialectal differences. In practical terms, standardization leads to smoother governance, wider communicability, of messages and speedier and easier dissemination of knowledge. Education, especially formal education, benefits a great deal from the availability of standard language, which provides a pedagogical ideal to teachers and people. The standard language is what schools teach, and it is also medium through which schools teach. Standardization furthermore enables writers, scientists, thinkers to create newer repositories of ideas, thoughts, and discoveries in the forms of books, journals, and other forms of scholarly discourse. Electronic and print media use of standard form extensively for news, views, and opinions. On the negative side, standardization acts as a powerful instrument for the domination of the elite over the masses. The standard language, because of its all pervasive use in administration, bureaucracy, law, the professions, and most importantly in education, helps the elite consolidate perpetuate their power. Though theoretically the standard language and the fruits of standardization are available to all, in actual practice, the vast majority remains outside the sphere of the standard. Thus, while the presence of standard language creates a kind of social mandate that in order to move up in terms of socio-economic success, education and professional advancement, one needs the standard language. The institutional and organizational structures are such that large majority of people are unable to learn and use the standard language. That being so, this vast majority is then perceived as being constituted of speakers of non-standard, substandard, or mere dialects. In turn, they lose out socio-economically and politically and are doomed to stay in positions of powerlessness. Another consequence of standardization is that speakers of dialects, of non-standard dialects, develop strong negative perceptions of their own varieties and even their own speech communities. These negative perceptions over a period of time get fixed in the psyche of the individuals and communities and become obstacles in their full and meaningful participation in national or regional enterprises. Languages have always been standardized, and all societies have created standard languages in order to consolidate and sustain their power, to exercise social control. Language standardization codification has always been seen as a positive human intervention aimed at larger good of people. Let's look at a few statements here by sociolinguists. It is probably fair to say that the only kind of variety which would count as proper language is standard language. Standard English, this kind of English used in this book, is not a dialect at all, but a language, whereas varieties are not used in formal writing or dialects. One can immediately see from these statements the kind of logic that is inexorably built up by those who create the standard language and who stand to benefit from it the most. The standard language is the only proper language, and this proper language is the only form that is suitable for formal or scholarly or learned writing. This being the logic, it is small wonder that all knowledge and learning and culture are appreciably by those who control and use the standard language. And it is then at their sole discretion that all the riches have to be apportioned among masses of common people. Let's look at second language acquisition. Just give me 1 minute, please. I'll be back. We're looking at block 7 actually. Le- Learner factors in second language acquisition. What's the difference between first language and second language? First language is language, normally the mother tongue, which we use for our day to day activities. Second language is learned more in formal circumstance, but we come into use through newspapers or radio, television, and other things, other media. We are in constant contact. Whereas foreign language, there's no such possibility. We learn it for completely different reasons. What are the factors involved in second language acquisition or the learning of second language? Now, first we have age. When do we start learning a second language? If we start learning at a younger age, it becomes easier for us. We can gain more native like fluency. If we start learning a second language at a higher age, it becomes little more difficult for us to learn this. It is said when we talk of gender, the girls learn second language faster than or better than the boys. It's very difficult to conclusively accept this, but there's a feeling. What are the factors of influence, intelligence, and aptitude? The emphasis of theory and practice of second language learning in the late 19th and greater half of the 20th century. was mainly on the behaviorist ideas of association between stimulus and response. It viewed the human mind as a blank slate, considering human learning as a mechanical process of habit formation. The greatest advocate of this view was the American psychologist B.F. Skinner. This view was challenged by the revolutionary ideas of Noam Chomsky in 1959. He felt that behaviorism simplified the learning process and underestimated the role of creativity of the human mind. He asserted the remarkable capacity of a child to generalize, hypothesize, process information in variety of very spatial, apparently high complex ways, which may be largely innate or may develop through some sort of learning or through maturation of the previous system. This shift had a tremendous impact on research in both first and second language learning. The learner, rather than the teacher or the materials, became the focus of study. Earlier, the focus was the teacher, the materials, the method of teaching. So the focus was on teaching. Now, the focus is on learning. Even ignore what we say. You are learners, you are not students. And we are counselors, we are not teachers. So it's something like saying you can take the horse to the pond, but the horse may not drink. It's up to the horse to drink. So the mother may put the food into the mouth of the child, but the process of eating will be done by the child itself. So there you cannot force. You cannot push in the food because it will gulp it out. So similarly, learning, teaching is not possible until and unless learning takes place. The focus is on learning and on teaching now. So the learner internalizes the rules in his or her own way, and it's up to the learner how to speak it, how to use it. Uh, Now, focus on learner gradually led researchers such as Woodosen, Morrow, and others to look beyond the linguistic needs to the communication needs of the learners. Another important consequence of the increasing focus on the learner was that the output of the learner began to be considered independent of the learner's first or target language. This output began to be called transitional competence by Corder, approximative system, NIMSA, and the interlanguage by Selinka. Let me just discuss a bit. Corder, S. Pitt Corder, in 71 said that there's a difference between mistake and an error. A mistake is more systematic. In a given environment, the learner will commit the same error. Whereas a mistake is not systematic, and in a given environment may or may not commit the same mistake. But error is systematic, and in the environment you will do the same. Same error will occur. Now, it talks of developmental errors. Suppose let's look at a very hypothetical example. Where a child has learned the formation of past with the help of ed. So when you add ed to a verb, it becomes past. So if the child comes the next day and uses the word goed, go plus ed, goed, you need not be surprised because at least the child has learned one rule. So then you tell the child, well, in such a case, it's not goed, it will be went. So maybe the child comes back the next day and uses what went. Past tense of do, went. Past tense of go was went. Past tense of do was went. It has he has learned another rule. So it has gone step by step higher. So it is learning the developmental error. Selinka talks of interlanguage. What is interlanguage? He says interlanguage is something between the first language and the second language. As no one speaks the second language 100% correctly, because it's not your native language, and the rules the rules followed by the first language or the second language, they may differ, and a learner uses the second language in such a way where there's influence of maybe slightly the first language, and this language he uses has its own grammar. Suppose you look at the students of mm, Aviation College, Cooch, Behar, the English honor students, and the English honor students of Presidency College, Kolkata, or St. Stephen's, Delhi. There is a difference in the way they use the language. And we're very clear that this student is from Aviation College, this student from Presidency College, this student is from St. Stephen's. And over the years, you'll find the same thing. So it has a grammar of its own. It follows a separate grammar, which we need to study. So according to Selinka, so he calls this second language. The shift from the teacher, and I have said that, the age. We have also discussed this age. Okay, there are um, people who learn it at the earliest age and they do much better later on. For adults, it becomes a little difficult to change so much. Uh, yeah. According to Cook, if children and adults are compared who are learning a second language in exactly the same way, whether as immigrants to Holland or by the same method in the classroom, adults are better. The apparent superiority of adults is much controlled. Research may mean that typical situations in which children find themselves are better suited to language, second language learning than those of adults encounter. Age itself is not so important as the different interaction that learners or different ages have with situations and with the people. Then the gender or the sex. Several studies of first and second language acquisition have shown girls to be better learners than boys. Trudgill showed that women use the prestige linguistic forms more frequently than men and related this phenomena to female social insecurity. In a study of Punjabi migrant children in England learning English as second language, Ognihatri in 1979 showed that girls assimilated the prestige linguistic forms faster than the boys while resisting the stigmatized fact, forms. Another researcher, Satyanath in 82, showed Kannadi women in Delhi showed a higher percentage of assimilation of linguistic features associated with Hindi. So, in most cases, it is the women who learn a second language better than the men. Intelligence. Intelligence is usually conceived as the ability to understand, to learn, and think things out quickly, especially compared with other people, and consists of verbal ability, reasoning ability, concept formation ability. Carroll in 1965 says, conceived of intelligence as a learner's capacity to understand instructions and to understand what is required of him or her in a learning situation. So there are a lot of intelligence tests used to find out the intelligence of the learner and how he is able to use it. But still, there are a lot of questions asked. All these tests may be useful as measures of mental ability of either an individual or a group of individuals, but these scores cannot be treated as pure predictors of success in second or foreign language, nor can they be considered as reflection of abilities to acquire a language. And this is the aptitude. Aptitude is for a particular job or skill is able to learn quickly and easily and to do it well. What people generally call a knack for languages is nothing but aptitude for languages. But it's very difficult to determine what this knack is. It's certainly more than having an ear for languages because everyone learns his first, his or her first language. It is popularly believed that some people have more aptitude for learning a second language than others. This observation has generally been made in connection with classroom learning and not learning in real life situations. Aptitude measures. Two best known measures of foreign language aptitude for native speakers of English are modern language aptitude tests developed by Carroll and Sapon and Pimsleur Language Ability Battery, 1966, ML80, incorporates four factors that predict student success in the classroom. First, phonemic coding ability, students' ability to use phonetic scripts to distinguish phonemes in languages, grammatical sensitivity of students' ability to pick out grammatical functions in a sentence, inductive language learning ability, students' ability to generalize patterns from one sentence to another, rote learning, students' ability to remember vocabulary lists of foreign language words. Just look at Unit 5 of Block 7. Here we discuss some more factors than second language acquisition. Their cognitive style, personality factors, attitude, and motivation. What is cognitive style? It refers to an individual's typical way of organizing his or her universe and reflects his or her personality or performance and not his or her ability or intelligence. For example, two boys, Anwar and Kanwal, look at two different kinds of cars, but their responses are quite different. Anwar thinks of how comfortable each car is, whereas Kanwal comments on each car's engine, its capacity, and how each car is designed. Types of cognitive styles: field dependence or field independence. The cognitive style called field dependence is defined by a person who cannot consider an object or event separately from the context in which it appears. The context in which an object appears is its field. On the other hand, field independent candidates have the capacity to process information or consider an object or event independent of the context. For example, when a person with a field independent cognitive style looks at painting, he or she has no difficulty in finding the certain motive of the painting and relating the details to a certain motive. Reflection or impulsivity. The cognitive style that refers to the degree to which children reflect upon problem is called reflection. Impulsivity, one of the tasks used to find out whether a particular individual is reflective or impulsive is to ask him or her to choose a picture or a design that is familiar to standard picture or design. This method is known as matching familiar figure test. The learner who are faster and less accurate are called impulsive, and those who are slower and more accurate are called reflective. Researchers have shown that learners after the age of certain of 11 are better able to answer with greater speed and more accuracy. The tendency of the reflective impulsive impulse is not fixed and therefore can be altered with training. And then the categorization details. Now the personality factors. Several researchers have emphasized the importance of personality in foreign and second language learning. Someone compared an average achievers and underachievers in high schools and noted that successful learner was invariably found to have personality traits such as social conformity, extroversion, flexibility, tolerance for ambiguity. Birds found that introversion, soberness, and self-sufficiency were strongly correlated with oral competence. Attitude. What is the person's attitude towards the language? An attitude is a mental or neural state of readiness, organized through experience, exerting a directive or dynamic influence upon the individual's response to all objects and situations with which it is related. In operational terms, the individual's attitude is, according to Gardner, an evaluative reaction to some referent or attitude object inferred on the basis of individuals' beliefs or opinions about the referent. So whether you have a positive attitude or a negative attitude about the subject helps one to learn a second language. Uh, we have got two more things here. Ethnocentrism and authoritarianism. Learners who have a strong ethnocentric or authoritarian attitude, or who have learned to be prejudiced towards a foreign language, are unlikely to approach the language learning task with an integrative outlook. Authoritarianism refers to anti-democratic feelings and is generally measured through respect for authority, use of force, nationalism, etc. Ethnocentrism, on the other hand, refers to people who respect foreign people and ideas and generally measured through attitude towards the foreigners, preservation of nationality, respect for national symbols, etc. Now, in case of motivation, we talk of integrative motivation and instrumental motivation. We're going to ask a few questions. In case of integrative motivation, I'm studying English because it will help me to mix with English people. It will improve my personality. It will help me to better understand English people. It will help me to read and understand and appreciate English literature, music, and films. Instrumental motivation. I'm studying English because it will help me to get a good job. It will help me to become a better educated person. It will help me to get a degree. It will help me to travel elsewhere without any difficulty. Uh, a bit more on motivation. There's extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation comes from inside, and extrinsic motivation comes from outside. Whether parents want you to learn something, parents want you to do something, intrinsic is inside. If I can show you this diagram. Yes. I'm just I'm just trying to show you this. Yeah, I think you see this. Integrative motivation. In case of intrinsic motivation, second language learner wishes to integrate with the second language culture, example for immigration or marriage, etc. Integrative motivation, in case of extrinsic motivation, someone else wishes the learner to know the second language for integrative reasons. Instrumental motivation, in case of intrinsic, second language learner wishes to achieve goal utilizing second language, that's for a career. Instrumental, in case of extrinsic motivation, external power wants the second language learner to learn the second language. Okay, that's all for now. Uh, if you have questions, please ask them, and we'll be able to discuss these even later. So thank you so much. I've got one more class that will be on block 8 and 9, and that will be the next week. So thank you. Stay safe in this pandemic situation. Please do your studies well. Please ask questions, and we will be able to answer you. Thank you so much. Bye bye.